All right, welcome back to the show, everyone, and to this episode. Is gossip destroying our culture and potentially our country? If so, what is gossip exactly? Why do we do it? How do we guard ourselves from gossip? And more importantly, how do we stay away from gossiping in our conversations? So today's episode is going to be all about gossip, and let's dive right in. So I wanted to give a clear definition on gossip. I'm all about clarity here and trying to get to the bottom of what things really mean. I think it's extremely important, especially in today's world. And so the definition for gossip is casual or unconstrained conversation or reports about other people, typically involving details that are not confirmed as being true. I think not confirmed there is especially important because some things could be true, but they're just not confirmed as being true. Otherwise, they can just be straight up exaggerated lies about people. Now, this is also referred to as spilling the tea in our culture. And so that's the definition of gossip, right? It's this casual or unconstrained conversational piece that we find a lot of people engaging in American culture. You know, we like to talk about people, and we like to sometimes exaggerate stories for dramatic effect. But why do people gossip then? Well, the first thing is that gossip is very stimulating. Creating that dramatization of a story can be very interesting, and it can be, like I said, very stimulating. It creates an exciting type of a conversation. It can also be a learned behavior, something that you've been doing subconsciously for a very long time because you grew up around it. You know, your parents gossiped, your grandparents gossiped, everyone in the community talked about other people. And so naturally it became the learned behavior of your own, and that's just naturally how you started to converse with other people. And lastly, people are very unaware of its destructiveness. That can be a reason why people gossip, is because they don't really realize the impact that it's actually having. So let's go into like, why is gossip even bad in the first place? Right? We've all heard, don't gossip, right? Don't engage in that. But gossip is fundamentally bad because it's based in lies and unsubstantiated claims. Now, I know that that's a sophisticated word, but unsubstantiated just means that it is not confirmed. There's no proof. There's nothing backing up what you're saying. There's no tangible evidence to back up what you're saying. And so fundamentally what we're saying is based in a lie because we don't know whether or not it's actually true. And it can also be extremely disrespectful to fellow community members, to our friends, and to our family. Because if we're talking behind people's back and we're sharing information that is not confirmed as being true, that's really disrespectful because we're sort of slandering and speaking lies against people in our community. And it's actually very cowardice in nature because oftentimes when we gossip, we're telling lies about people to other people. So we're not saying it directly to their face. We're not giving them a chance to defend themselves. We're not giving them a chance to show counter evidence against the actual claim itself. And so fundamentally, it's based in lies. And it almost further enhances a gaslight type of effect. If you watched our episode on gaslighting, you'll know what we're talking about. And if you haven't gone and checked out that video on gaslighting, I highly recommend going and checking it out because it's very tied in to gossip itself. And gossip is actually sort of a tactic that people can use within gaslighting, but it's a little bit different than gaslighting. Now, what are some examples of gossip and its effects? So I'm just going to use a completely hypothetical situation here to demonstrate the tactics, the mechanism, and the impacts that gossip can have. So let's say that we have an assassination event in our country. 33 hours later, the FBI comes out and says that they got the assailant. Great. The shooter claims that it wasn't him, and there isn't any concrete evidence tying him to pulling the trigger. Not so great. Meanwhile, before the FBI even comes out with the assailant, the entire country is gossiping about who did it. The left says it's the right says it's the left, and once the FBI shows the public their main suspect, the left starts looking for evidence that he was on the right, and the right starts looking for evidence that he was on the left. Both sides find evidence that confirms their bias, and they start spreading those details. They start gossiping even more. And so like a game of telephone, those details become contorted, bent, and remanufactured to fit people's worldview. And again, it's all based within unsubstantiated claims that don't have real solid evidence to back them up. And so soon the left starts arguing about the right's contorted details and vice versa. So now we're arguing about things that aren't even true. And while everyone is arguing over the shooter's sexual orientation and political beliefs, the FBI hasn't even proven the shooter is guilty. So here we have an unconfirmed shooter, and we're all arguing about said shooter. And the fog of war, and the fog of war is it's a war term, but it's sort of like this smoke screen. It's kind of like this gaslighting effect. But once that smoke screen has become so thick that everyone starts to spread the unsubstantiated claim that the shooter is even the shooter in the first place. Gossip makes our country weak, vulnerable, and so easy to manipulate. As demonstrated in the game Telephone, if you've ever played the game Telephone, info can become so contorted that the first person can even forget what was even said. Because in the game of Telephone, you have a phrase that you're supposed to start with. So one person starts with a phrase. You're usually sitting in a circle, and that person whispers in the ear that phrase, that particular phrase. Let's say it's the cow jumps over the moon. And the first person whispers it over to the person sitting next to them, and then it keeps following this pattern. The cow jumps over the moon. The cow jumps over the moon. And pretty soon, after it passes around 15 to 20 times, the phrase is completely different. And so that's what I mean by the information becomes contorted. It becomes misconstrued and jumbled up. So how do we guard ourselves from gossip, and how do we prevent gossip from corrupting our relationships, corrupting ourselves, because it corrupts yourself when you're gossiping, because you're not recognizing the power of your word. We're not recognizing the power of our words. And our words are actually extremely powerful because they say a lot about us. And so some things that we can do to actually guard ourselves from gossip and to start promoting a culture that strays away from gossip, one of the first things that we can do is to really listen to what people in your life are talking about. Like, get really engaged in your conversations. Listen to whether or not they're talking about lies about themselves or other people. Try to see if they really honor and recognize the power of their word. Are they sticking to their commitments? Do they see their commitments as something that's taken seriously? And do they gossip to you about other people? So when you're talking to them, are they gossiping about someone else in your friend group or someone else in your family, so on and so forth? And I want you to just use these questions as a measure of reliability. And I want you to ask yourself these things based upon these 3 bullet points up here. So if someone lies to you about themselves and or other people, do you think that you can rely on them to tell the truth about you? I'll say it again. If someone lies to you about themselves and or other people, do you think that you can rely on them to tell the truth about you? Okay, let's go to the next question. If someone doesn't honor and recognize the power of their word, do you think that they will be reliable to you? If someone doesn't honor and recognize the power of their word, do you think that they will be reliable to you? Thirdly here, if someone gossips about others to you, what do you think the likelihood is that they gossip about you to others? So if someone gossips about others to you, talks about other people to you, what do you think the likelihood is that they gossip about you to others? They talk about you with other people. Okay? So these questions, I want you to use these questions as a measure of reliability. What do I mean by that? Well, I want you to recognize that if you're answering these questions in sort of a way where it's, okay, someone is lying to you about themselves and other people, and I'm starting to think maybe I can't really rely on them to tell the truth about me. Or if someone isn't honoring their word and recognizing the power of their word, I'm starting to recognize I don't think that they're going to be very reliable as a friend to me. Or someone is gossiping about other people with me. I think the likelihood that they're gossiping about others, that they're gossiping about me to others, is very high. And so I don't want you to just automatically go to, okay, I got to cut this person out of my life. That might be the case. But I want you to think a little bit more tactically. I think we should think a little bit more tactically. Because it's not necessarily about one person gossiping. This is about our country. This is about the direction of our nation. And so if we simply just start cutting other people off based on these things, we're not going to be able to necessarily influence them to maybe move in a better direction, to start talking about more positive things. And so when I'd say measure of reliability, if these questions are coming out and revealing things to you that, maybe you didn't recognize before, it would be safe to put your guard up with these people. If someone is lying to you about themselves and or other people, don't rely on them to hold your information with integrity. So don't share with them as much as maybe you were previously. And if someone doesn't honor their commitments and their word, then don't expect them to. If we expect someone who has consistently neglected their word over and over again to start honoring their word, it's likely going to lead in disappointment and frustration. But instead, we can just recognize, okay, this person doesn't really see the value of their word and doesn't honor their commitments, and I know that's their pattern. And so things that they say to me aren't necessarily as integral, and they're not as powerful. I don't hold them to their word because they haven't proven that they hold themselves to their word. And additionally, if someone is gossiping about others to you, and do you think that the likelihood that they're gossiping about you to others is pretty high? And by the way, if someone is gossiping about others to you, it's almost like 95% sure that they're gossiping about you to others. It's wired into their conversational frameworks to talk about other people. And so, in the back of your mind, you might be like, oh, but I'm so close to this person. Like, I feel like I'm so special to them that they wouldn't talk behind my back. But if their integrity is to the point where they're talking about other people behind their back to you, it's very, very, very likely that their integrity is so low that they're talking about you behind your back. And so, but if someone is gossiping about you, then be very strategic about the information that you share with them. And we'll talk about some information and some ways that we can go about this. So how can we set good examples and influence others to stay away from gossip? So when someone gossips to us, it's kind of a ingrained response where we just naturally want to hear more, and we want to hear the rest of the story. We want to get the conclusion. We want to ask questions about that gossip, that piece of information. But instead of doing that, I want to challenge you to not even entertain the topic. I just want you to pause, recognize in your mind, okay, this person's trying to gossip with me. I want to be better. I want to do a little bit better. And so I'm just not going to entertain what they even said. I'm going to try to think of something else to talk about. And there's this principle in psychology where if someone doesn't get a reward for their behavior, oftentimes it can lead them to wanting to do a different behavior where they're going to get a reward. Okay, so it's like, I'm not comparing humans to rats, but it's a similar principle. Or dogs, for example. Let's use dogs as an example. So when a dog does something really good, let's say that they go outside and they poop in the spot where you want them to poop, and so you give them a treat. The next day they go outside, they poop in the same spot, you give them another treat. So you give them a reward to tell them, hey, you're doing really good. I like this. You should like it too, because you're going to get a treat every time you do this. Okay, so but then, after a few days, you start taking away that treat. And the dog's like, well, I'm not getting a treat anymore. I'm not getting a response that I want anymore. So I'm going to go poop somewhere else. And in our conversations, it's like, okay, I'm not getting a reward for gossiping anymore. I'm not getting the response that I want. I'm going to talk about something else. So by not entertaining the topic and by redirecting, we can tell the person, just through a simple psychological principle, like, hey, I'm not going to talk about this with you. I'm not going to reward you for this behavior. And by doing that, we can influence them into a positive direction and show them a different way of interacting with one another. Which leads us directly into the next thing, which is finding better and more interesting things to talk about. And this is sort of tough, right? Like, we're so used to talking about other people. But there's so many amazing things that we can talk about. And I have 12 of them listed out, but there's obviously hundreds of different topics that you can talk about. But the first thing is life story. I find people's life story so interesting. I love talking to people about their life, their childhood, their earliest memories. Like for me, I have a really early memory that I remember. And it was when I was like 3. Or probably it might have been younger than that because I was in a car seat still. So I was younger than that. But I remember being in a car seat, looking out of the car seat, and seeing Green Bay related stuff and being in my childhood home and looking out at my family. So I have that memory, and it's just crazy because at that age you're not really supposed to remember things, right? And so just small things like that, your earliest memories. What do you remember about being a baby? What did your parents say about you when you were a baby? But the reason that I can talk about life story so well is because I've developed a framework for understanding my own life story. And so I can take that framework and I can apply it to other people so I can learn about their life story. And that's all a part of my coaching program as well. And so is this, by the way, this entire framework about not gossiping and leaning into better things to talk about and developing our character so that we stray away from gossip. But another thing that we could talk about is our dreams. You know, what do we want for ourselves? What do we want for our family? What do we want for our country? Those are really great things to talk about. Our passions, the things that light us up inside when we think about them or do them. Why? Why do they do that? And what's so amazing about those passions that we have? Why do we enjoy them? Is there any downside to us being so passionate about those things? Our goals in life. You know, like what are the actual goals that we have? And what are we working towards right now? Our own interests. You know, if you read sci-fi novels or you watch Lord of the Rings movies or you're really captivated by a Netflix show. You know, a lot of people talk about Netflix shows and they're like, here's what I'm watching. And they're like, dude, you should really watch the show. But what I think would be even more interesting is asking them like, okay, like most likely I'm not going to watch the show that you reference because there's so much content out there in the world, and I have my own shows that I like to watch. So let's just get past that part of the conversation. And, you know, I'd be interested to know, like, okay, you're watching this Netflix show. Like, why is it so impactful to you? What are you so interested in about it for? What character do you resonate with the most? Which character do you see yourself in, and why? These can be questions that will start some interesting conversations. Your hobbies. You can talk about things that you do outside of work, sports that you participate in, current events, things going on in the world. Although be careful with current events because a lot of times we can get current events from unreliable sources and end up in gossip, talking about unsubstantiated claims. Our pets. We can talk about our pets. What do we got going on in the pet world? How are our pets doing? What are we trying to train them on? How are we trying to get them better? You know, just having fun talking about pets. Positive things that happened this week. What are some things that happened that were really good this week? Talk about those things and what they meant to you. The future. The future of civilization. Where are we going? Where are we headed? Why do you think we're headed there? It says his-lory, but I meant his story. History. What are some things that we're interested about in history? Why are we interested in them? What do we know about it? Science. What are some things, scientifical developments? I don't know if scientifical is a word. What are some developments in the science world going on? Technology. What are some developments in technology? There's so many things that we can talk about. So many things. We just have to recognize the corruptiveness of gossip and decide to walk a better path. Decide to stop spilling the tea. Additionally, we can use conversational frameworks to help us shift our mindset. So like I said with the life story, in my coaching program, there's an entire life story framework that I use to uncover details about my life so that I can update my memories. Because, for example, I have a memory from when I was 12. And when I was 12, that event happened. That event got stored in my mind. And my understanding of that event also got stored in my mind. And then 13 years later, that understanding is still the same because I haven't thought about it again. Because I haven't recontextualized the event. So my mindset when I was 12 is obviously much different now because I'm 26. And so I have a little bit of a different and more mature understanding of the world. So now if I go back from my current 26 mindset, I can look back on the world at 12 and I can recontextualize it from that perspective of that more mature and hopefully more reasonable perspective. And by doing that, I can actually change the trajectory of my behavior. Because when these things get stored in our mind, they often come with a set of related beliefs and behaviors about the world. And oftentimes it can be the same beliefs and behaviors that we responded to that situation with when we were 12. And so we have this set of subconscious behaviors that we are doing every day, that we're performing every day, and we don't know why. And it's because we haven't gone back and updated our memories. And so that's sort of part of the life story framework in itself. And why the life story framework is so powerful and positive, but it also can bleed into our conversations. And by having this framework of understanding our own life story, we can also share that framework with other people in simple conversations. And, I've done it and it's actually been really helpful for other people. They get to reflect on things that they haven't thought about in a long time. And they get to update their memories. And they get to look back on these things from a more mature perspective. Maybe a more balanced perspective. And so it's really powerful. The life story, I'm telling you, is one of the most powerful things that I've done in my life to uncover more meaning and purpose in my life. I'm at a point in my life where I have the deepest meaning and purpose I've ever had. Where, just, let's say like 5 years ago, I was not there. I didn't have any meaning or purpose. I was just sort of flying by the wayside in terms of meaning and purpose. And I didn't have a solid direction that I wanted to go in my life. I felt lost. But now, I feel extremely clear about where I want to go, why I want to do it, who I want to do it with, how I want to do it. And yeah, so it's really great having that clarity because it clears up your mental bandwidth so that you can focus on a lot of other things and also have more productive conversations. So, in this episode, we talked a lot about gossip, how it's destructive, why it's destructive, what it is, and how we can guard ourselves from it, and how we can avoid it in our conversations. Now, I'd be really curious to hear from you guys about what you think about gossip. Do you think it's destructive, or do you disagree? Do you think that gossip is constructive? If so, comment down below. I'm totally open to differing opinions in my comment section, but remember to do it respectfully. I'm not going to tolerate disrespect in the comment section, and if you are being blatantly disrespectful, your comments will be deleted. Not because I don't respect your right to freedom of speech, but because I'm not going to tolerate disrespect, and that's just what it is. So, yeah, if you got any value out of this, by the way, let me know down in the comment section. If you learned anything, comment down below. And we'll see you on the next episode.